Okay, here I just want to follow up on a topic from our textbook, the Grasshopper Primer by ModeLab, version 3. Um, and I think it's good. I think it's a good way to introduce kind of one of the basics of breaking lists down into items that you want and items that you don't want. So kind of breaking them down into selected items for the purposes of drawing in a particular way. Okay, so we'll go through this step by step. And first, we're not going to start with a grid this time, surprisingly. We're going to start instead with a point. And I'm going to draw a line from that point. So I'm going to go to curve, and over here in primitive, you'll find line STL. Okay. And because I have these XY axes shown, I'm going to move this up a little bit. You don't have to do this if you don't like. I'm just going to move it up so that it's easier to see on screen, so you can see that point now, right, a little bit easier. The direction that I'm going to move this in here, I guess we'll start in the X direction. Okay, so I'll just head over to vector and go to vector here and grab my unit X. That'll be our direction input here. And then the length we can set to something, whatever we like. So I'm just going to set the length somewhere between 0 and I guess 50. Alright, so you'll see that as I increase this, the line will get longer. Just crank it up to 50. So I have a 50 unit long line. What I'm now going to do is divide that line a bunch of times. So I'll go to curve, division, divide curve. And let's just say we want to divide this the same number. Well, maybe not actually. Let's make this a different number. So I'm going to divide this maybe, let's see what feels right here. I guess maybe just 15 times. Give it a good spacing. Okay. And then from these sets of points, I'm going to draw a bunch of new lines in the y direction. Okay, so I guess I'll just copy and paste this stuff over. And what I'll do is I'll just kind of swap out the x vector here for the y. Okay, draw those upward. It's basically a slightly different way of developing a more or less a grid, but actually in the end it won't be. These points I no longer need because I'm going to end up dividing these one more time. Right, so we're going to move on with some more divisions for each one of these separate lines. So we got 16 segments here, lines. And but before we do that, I want to break this. I want to be able to choose every other line. So first one, third one, fifth, and so on, and then separate that out from the second, the fourth, the sixth, the eighth, and so on. So the evens versus the odds. And we'll talk about why in just a second. One way to do that, we can go over to set and grab our dispatch component here, like we saw previously. So we'll plug those in, and then we just need to give this thing a dispatch pattern. So here, it's giving us the A's and the B's here. By default, it's set to true and false, so we can leave that alone. And now it's showing us both of the outputs here. So what I need to do is go to parameters here and grab one of these curve parameters, and then we can see that out of the A's I'm getting the odds here, right? Because it's going to go true, false, true, false, true, false. So basically the A output is going to be the true output, and the B will be the false. And it's kind of useful because now I could get basically I can act on these independently of those. Okay, and that's what we're going to do. So let's move into the next step, which is going to be to just break those into a set of points. So I'm going to divide them once again. So divide the curves. All right. And here what we want to do is divide them, we want to kind of control that with a parameter. So I guess I'll just kind of copy and paste this over, just to reuse it. And I want to be able to make changes to this later. So I'm going to plug that in. Maybe I'll tighten these up a little bit, so I'll go up to like 20 on this one. Alright, something like that. Pretty nice. Now what we want to do is develop another pattern for these points. So we've already drawn out, you can see that we've already drawn out the evens and odds. So we have these things organized using this little component here, basically with this little Boolean mask, true and false, 1 and 0. And we have an organized set of points along each one of those lines independent of those. Okay, so there's a little bit of an independent sets going on. And what we want to do now is kind of select 2 at a time. So 1, 2, remove the next 2, select the next 2, and so on. So 2's with a space of 2 in between, if that makes any sense. And you can look at the example in the primer for this. I just got started in a slightly different way here than they did. One certainly isn't better than the other. This one's actually a little more work. Just wanted to introduce I found it as an opportunity to introduce the curve, the line STL, I should say. Okay, so I'm going to go to set and sequence, and I'm going to find this call pattern component here. All right, and we're going to set a pattern, and we're going to just manually type that up. So I'm going to go to the panel here, and I'm just going to say 1, enter 1, enter 0, enter 0, but don't hit enter a 4th time. And then I'm going to right click on that and turn that to multi-line data. Right, making sure that that has an index. Each one of those has an index. And I'm going to put that into my pattern input here. And then the points are going to be into there. And now you can see the green selections is I got 2, and I'm skipping 2, 2 more, skipping the next 2, giving me the next 2, and so on. And that's set by this pattern here. And since it ends with a single point, we'll have to sort of pay attention to that later on. But I think it's going to draw the curves just fine. And we have the other set that we have to act on as well. We can reuse the pattern for that. But this time we're going to invert it. And we can just right click on that P and just click invert. Okay, so that's going to give us the other set. So if I select these 2 together, right, these are our odds, and we have a repeating pattern of starting with 2, leaving out 2, starting with 2, and so on. The other lines, the evens, we left out 2 to begin, and then the pattern continues on up. All right, so we have a kind of an alternating pattern back and forth here. Well, what's now pretty nice is now we can start associating the first of this list with the first of that list. So we can start associating this set of points with that set, and then we can associate this set with that set, and up and down the line all the way through the entire data set. In order to do that, we can weave. Right, so let's go to Sets, List, and Weave. The pattern we can put into P here. And let's put these into 0 and 1. And now you can see that I'm selecting all that together. I can turn those off, I suppose. And those are woven together into a data set that we can now use to draw a set of curves with an alternating curvature, and kind of a sign like, in between the two sets of lines. So let's go ahead and draw that. So let's go to Curve and Spline. We'll go over to NURBS curve, and we'll draw that. And it looks like we may have a problem here. So one thing we can try is to just kind of click on this and reverse the pattern, which seems to go ahead and fix it. And I think that's because it ended, potentially because that ended on a single point there. So what we wanted to do is reverse that. So actually what we're doing is starting with a single point and then comparing that to the other 2. But I'm going to dig into that a little further. In any case, as the sample is set up, we have that reversed, and we have our lines drawn. And it's a pretty nice way to kind of, to introduce, just kind of the basics of using a pattern here, kind of a 1 and 0 pattern, to select items from a larger set that we need and remove things that we don't. But it also allows us to kind of associate data paths to one another from 2 different sets. And if we go back a little bit, we should be able to reverse the pattern coming into dispatch to draw the curves in the opposite direction. We can see if that works. So I'm going to just go ahead and invert this pattern. Yeah, and it looks like now we can just kind of flip those. which is useful also to know. And now what we want to do, just to kind of wrap this one up a little bit before we get into surfaces and stuff, you can feel free to follow the example. I just wanted to come full circle with this and just use a simple mirroring in order to kind of complete the pattern of opposite alternating curves. Okay, so we're just going to do a quick mirroring. I'm going to pay attention to this A output because I'm just going to use those as the mirror axis. I guess we can use these others as well. B's will probably be okay as well. But in any case, I'm going to find that first point, and to do it a couple different ways. What I can do is find the start and end point of the line, which we know is the A here. I suppose another way to do it is to just find, we can go to set and list and item index, and we can find the first point. Oops, wrong one. Not item index. Apologies. Actually, it's going to be list item. And we can find the first point of all those lists. That will also work. So we can go ahead and test both. I'll turn one off for now, and we'll just go ahead with the start point of the line, which will be enough. Plus that's in a, now what we want to do for the mirroring, we need to set an axis. So I'm just going to pull the mirror first. I believe that's in transform. And under Euclidean, we'll find mirror. And what we're trying to do is mirror the curves. Okay? And we could see is, it's mirroring over the origin, so it's just going to mirror the entire thing, the entire pattern over the origin in the other direction. We don't want that. We want to mirror them relative to individual points that they touch. And that's what we have here. So all we need to do is basically set a mirror plane. And what we need, the plane that we need is the YZ plane. So let's go over to vector, plane, and YZ. Let's set a plane on each one. And what we need to do is match our data up, right? So here we've got a grafted data set. We can either flatten this or we can graft this. Either way, it's okay in this case. So let's go ahead and just right click and put the upward arrow on that and just go ahead and match that there. So now we have a matching data structure. All right, and I think I'm going to go back and start turning a few things off here. We can just sort of take a look at the curves for them on their own. We got a nice little mirroring happening. Now I believe another way to do this is to just use these points, and these points are already grafted for us, right? They're already in that structure. So I'm going to copy this. I'm going to go ahead and, yeah, I guess I can leave that, doesn't matter. Put that there. And this one we don't have to graft because the data is already structured in a way, right? Because it's been structured by this component, and that's the component that this comes from. That's the dependency. This one's dependent on that. And so that data structure will be maintained. And now we don't need to graft anything further to, we just have to go ahead and put that and we get the same result. Okay, so depending on what you're doing and how you're extracting information, you'll have to just pay attention to whether or not your data structures are aligning. And oftentimes you need them to, more times than not. There are very few occasions where a kind of a list like this will match up to the kind of the chain link here in a single component. There are times where that's necessary or useful, and there are times when it isn't. In this case, we don't want that. All right. In any case, what we covered here is a couple interesting basics. One, a different way of drawing out a field condition. In this case, it's just starting with a single point, moving on with a line, dividing that line, using those as starting points for more lines. We use those lines as a way to structure basically our pattern into two different sets, evens and odds, dividing those even further, and then using another bit mask here, another Boolean mask here in order to develop a simple pattern of selections and not selections, or in a way removing objects from the list that we don't want and only maintaining the ones we do using calling. And you can put any custom pattern into this, and we'll explore that in the next exercise. It'll be the final one for this week. And then from there we just weave them together so that we can associate the odds to the evens and the zeros to the zeros, the ones to the ones, the twos to the twos, and so on in terms of their order in the list. And the rest is just drawing the geometry. It's nice and organized for us. Okay, so that's all for this one. We'll move on to part 2 of this particular topic, and we'll wrap up for the week.